everyone. I am Elizabeth Coates, library technician and enthusiastic volunteer, and I am so thrilled to welcome you to today's Forest of Reading author visit with special guest Nicola Dahlin. Each year in the forest, we have the incredible privilege of meeting a brand new group of talented authors, and this year's lineup hits it out of the park. We know that thousands of students will be tuning in to watch this session throughout the year, so whatever the weather, we're glad you're here. Our session today will have two parts. First, our nominee Nicola will share her presentation. Second will be an opportunity to get to know Nicola a little better with some questions and answers. Now, don't forget, voting for all Forest of Reading Awards happens in April, and our 2026 Forest of Reading Festival and Digital Awards celebrations take place May 12 to 14. You can find all the details at forestofreading.com. Now, let's get started. We are delighted to have with us today Nicola Dahlin, author of If We Tell You, which is nominated for the Red Maple Award. Nicola grew up in a Scottish seaside town. After studying in Glasgow, she lived and worked in the Netherlands and the Sultanate of Oman before emigrating to Canada. She lives in Calgary with her husband, their 3 children, and a curious rabbit. Please join me in giving a warm Forest of Reading welcome to Nicola Dahlin.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and it's such a pleasure to meet you at last and to be here today. And I am going to share my screen so you can see the presentation that I have. Okay. So, as Elizabeth said, the Forest of Reading has got lots of great books this year. In our section, there are these fantastic books. And 14-year-old me would have loved this program in my school, to read all of these books, or even just some of the books, and be able to discuss the characters with my friends, to guess what was going to happen next. And when the book was finished, to talk about what could happen after the book and start making up our own stories. So I hope you enjoy reading some, or maybe even all of these books. The book I'm here to talk to you about today, if I can get my, next slide, there we go, I'm an expert, is If We Tell You. If We Tell You is an action-adventure story, but at its heart, it's a heartfelt story of siblings and finding your own identity. But today, I'd like to focus on the action-adventure arc and use that to show the components of a story that will then allow you to make your own story if you would like to. So making up stories is a really, really fun thing to do. And stories are amazing because if you can't find a book that you're excited to read, you can make up your own story. You can make it up in your head. You never need to tell anybody about it. Whenever you're bored, sat on a bus, struggling to sleep, you can start thinking of the story and adding more pieces and making it the very best story just for you. But if you do decide to share your story with someone, or just pieces of your story with someone, there's lots of different ways to do that. One way that's been since the beginning of humans is just to speak your story. Through the ages, people have sat round and just told stories to each other. Before the printing press, before even the alphabet was invented, this is how people shared stories. And you all know someone who's really good at telling stories, who can make taking the dog for a walk into something really exciting, that they chased a squirrel and then they met this person. If you're one of those people that can tell a really good story, then this is for you. Dream up a story and tell people. Find someone to tell people about your story. The other way to tell stories that's been around since the dawn of time is music. Even news was spread through songs. Minstrels would go from village to village and sing songs about a plague that had broken out or a battle that had started somewhere else. So if you like music and you've always thought of writing your own song lyrics, one way to do it is to dream up a story first and then tell the story through song lyrics. Now, if you like drawing, pictures are a fantastic way to share a story, and you can do it in any style you like. You can make a cartoon, you could do a graphic novel type image, you can even do models or collages. Any visual art is a fantastic way of sharing stories. Now, if you do like writing, but really you're only interested in what the people say, then just write down the dialogue. This is basically a movie script. And you can write a movie script with just dialogue, and then you can even have your friends act it out. It's a really fun way to share stories. If you do like writing, and if you want to write the whole thing, then of course you can write a book like I did. But a story doesn't have to be 400 pages. It doesn't have to be a book that you're going to publish. It can just be 2 pages or 3 pages. You can write a story as short as you want. So lots of ways to share your stories if that's what you decide to do. Now, the different parts of a story. Sometimes you think a story, excuse me, sometimes you think of a whole story at once from beginning to end and all the characters and all the things that are going to happen. But most of the time you just think about 1 or 2 components of the story. And it doesn't matter what component you start with something and then you build from there. So say you think of a character, you think of a girl who turns things to ice, or you want to write about a boy who can climb up the side of buildings. That's the who of the story. From there, you need to think of any of these components, but say you think of the where of the story next, or you think of the where of the story first. You've always wanted to write a story that took place in a zoo, or on Mars, or in a chocolate factory, or at the World Soccer Cup tournament. Then you can decide on the setting of your book first. Or maybe you want to write a story where people ride horses. So you want to write it where before cars and airplanes existed. Or you really like science fiction and you want to set it far, far, far into the future so you can set it on a distant planet. That's the when of the story. Often what people think of first is the what of the story, which is really the big thing that happens. So you can imagine in Hunger Games, it's children fighting it out until only one survives. Or in The Maze Runner, a group of children trying to find their way through a deadly maze. That's the one big thing that happens. Wherever you start, always remember the why. So the why is really what makes the characters do what they do, what pulls them through the story. You can think of it as what's the prize at the end of the book that the characters are racing towards. So it can be a material prize like a chest full of treasure or a sports trophy, or it can be a more personal prize like rescuing a friend from an evil wizard. But think of why it is the characters are going through the story, what it is they're trying to achieve by the end. Now, another really interesting place to start, and this is how I started to write If We Tell You, is to think of the premise. Now, the premise is the central idea of the story. So it's when you haven't thought about anything in the story other than you're really interested in an idea. So for example, in Jurassic Park, it would be, what if dinosaurs existed today? Or in Harry Potter, it would be, what if magical schools existed to train young witches and wizards? So the premise is really a what if question, and you can just dream up all sorts of things. What if aliens landed? What if all 12-year-olds woke up tomorrow and had a superpower? And this is where I started my book. I had this question that I kept thinking about over and over, and I didn't know how I was going to write the book or what kind of story I wanted to tell, but it was this burning question that I kept thinking about, which was, how well do we really know our parents? What did your parents get up to, or the adults that look after you? What did they get up to before you were born? And if it was something bad, would they tell you? Can you imagine the conversation around the dinner table? Your mom says to you, I hope you were polite to your teachers today. And you say, did you used to say please and thank you when you robbed banks? And I thought, yeah, if your parents had done something shady before you were born, they probably wouldn't tell you. Next, I had to think about, or I wanted to think about the characters, the who of the story, and I came up with identical twin brothers, Cameron and Lewis. Now, Cameron loves soccer, He overthinks things all the time, but pretends he doesn't. He pretends he's really cool, but really is just always overthinking things. His brother Lewis likes math, and he has no filter. So whatever comes into his brain, he just says it. Now, the reason I wanted identical twins was because they can pretend to be one person, so they can hide by pretending to be the same person. So I had my central idea and I had my main characters, and now I needed to decide how the story starts. And I thought, okay, how would they find out their parents' secret in a way that their parents could not deny? It had to be something so drastic that would change Cameron and Lewis's life forever. And I decided they needed to see the secret in action. So one summer's afternoon, their family is having a barbecue in the backyard. They invite their neighbors. Dad is flipping burgers, mom is offering people food, chatting to people. Lewis and Cameron are probably kicking around a ball, talking to their friends, eating ice cream, and then two uninvited guests arrive. Two people that no one recognizes except their parents. So the brothers, as well as all the other guests, expect their parents to introduce the two new people and offer them some food. Instead, their dad shoots one of the strangers and the mom stabs the other. That's kind of difficult for the parents to deny. Then, without missing a beat, the parents give each of the boys a backpack and they tell them to run. Next, I wanted to decide where to set my story. I knew I wanted the boys to grow up in a small town in Canada. And then I had to decide where they run to. The parents tell them to run, where do they go? I wanted it to be somewhere completely different to where they grew up, so they'd feel out of place and lost. And I also wanted the place where they run to be so far away, so distant that they knew no one. I wanted them to be completely alone. I chose Scotland because that's where I grew up, so I know it. And I chose Edinburgh because of all the cool places there are to set different parts of the story. So Edinburgh has a castle, and it sits on top of a hill of volcanic rock. And wherever you go in the city, if you look up, you can see the castle. And on a sunny day, it's beautiful. But on a cloudy day, and there are lots and lots of cloudy days in Scotland, most days in Scotland are cloudy, the castle looks dark and eerie and imposing. So it's a great place to set a story. Also, it's 1,000 years old, this castle, so it has dungeons. The other very cool thing about Edinburgh is there are tunnels underneath the city. Now, I find tunnels fascinating, and it's always good to write about something that really interests you. Why were the tunnels built? Who built the tunnels? What were they used for? And people are still discovering these 100-year-old tunnels even today. Someone will renovate their basement in Edinburgh, they'll knock down a wall and they'll go, oops, there's another stretch of tunnel. One day while I was in Edinburgh, I drove out of the city with my son, and we drove past all the houses as it finished, we drove through fields, we drove past forests, and we drove all the way to this golf course called Dahlin. Now, the building in the golf course where people collect their golf clubs and eat lunch is an old house. It used to be somebody's grand old house. And inside on the walls are drawings of what the house looked like 300 years ago. But there's also a story. And the story that's meant to be true is that important prisoners would be smuggled out of the dungeons underneath Edinburgh Castle through the tunnels to this house where they would be given horses and supplies so they could escape. Well, this was exciting. If the tunnels stretched that far underneath Edinburgh and beyond, where else were they? Where else did they lead to? So I had my idea, parents keeping big secrets, big dark secrets. I had the beginning of the stories where the parents reveals a part of the secret by killing 2 people and telling the boys to run. I had the boys running to Edinburgh with its castle and its dungeons and its tunnels. And then what? What happens then? So I thought, well, if the parents are there waiting for them, it's not much of a story. The story is going to be over. So of course they get to the meeting place in Edinburgh where the parents are meant to be, and the parents aren't there. In fact, the parents don't arrive. So the boys aren't going to sit around waiting. They're going to want to know, is there anybody else dangerous going to come after them? Where are their parents if they're not here? And most importantly, are their parents good or are the parents bad? Now, one of the most exciting things, or I find the most enjoyable about writing stories, is dreaming up the cast of characters. Now, the boys are in a city where they know no one. They're going to meet people they can trust. They're going to meet people that they definitely can't trust. But the core cast of characters, the people who help them along the way on their adventure, are these folks. So we have Aisha, we have Ruby, we have Jamie Wallace, the old lady is called Max, and her dog is called Haggis. And of course, we have Cameron and Lewis. Now, when you dream up characters, it's really fun, of course, to think about what they look like and what their names are, but more important is what type of people they are. So do they make people laugh? Are they lonely? Do they themselves have siblings? Do they do sport? And also how all of the characters interact with each other. So some of these characters get on really well with each other, and other of these characters clash a little bit and often bicker. So it's really interesting to think about how the shape between the characters and how they all get along with each other or how they don't get along with each other. And what strengths do the characters bring and what weaknesses do they bring to the adventure? So we have the beginning of our story with the boys having to run away because their parents killed 2 people, killed 2 uninvited guests at the barbecue and tell them to run. We have the setting, they run to Edinburgh, with the dungeons and the tunnels and the castle, and then they meet people along the way that help them. These people here, they meet Mags, they meet Haggis the dog, who's very cute, they meet Aisha, they meet Jamie Wallace, and they meet Ruby. And then they go on the adventure. Now, the adventure I'm not going to talk about because it will spoil the story, but they go and they have this adventure in Edinburgh and beyond. And now what I'd like to ask you to do is think about what kind of story you would like to dream up. And if you want to share it with someone, how would you share it? Would you just tell it to someone? Would you write song lyrics? Would you draw pictures? Would you write a script and have your friends act it out? Or would you write it all down in a story? And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Nicola, for your incredible and informative presentation. That was great. I'm feeling like I have to read the book again because it's been a little while and I just want to dig right back into it again. So I have a few questions to get to know a little bit more about you and your book. So the first one is, what was your favorite scene to write and what was the hardest?
Yeah, well, when I think of a story, I think of it in my head first. It's almost like a movie playing. So the scenes that I find easy to write are scenes where there's a lot to look at. So they're in a really interesting place and they're doing something. And really, if there's if there's 2 or 3 characters, so there can be dialogue as well. So scenes where a lot is happening. So you can write about things in the setting that the character notices. You can write, of course, about what they're doing, and then you can have the dialogue sprinkled in. And if it's getting a little bit too dark, you can have some funny dialogue. And so they're the scenes that I find the easiest to write. And then conversely, of course, the scenes that are difficult for me to write is where they're not in somewhere interesting, There's not much action going on, and there's only one character. And I wrote one of these. There's a chapter in the book that is no more. It got deleted, but I spent hours writing it. Actually, that's a lie. I spent days and days writing this chapter, and it was a train journey, and Cameron was on the train by himself, and he wasn't going to talk to anybody because he didn't want to draw attention to himself. So he was on this train journey, saying nothing, talking to no one for the whole chapter. And there's only so many fields with cows you can write about. And there's no dialogue and there's no action, it's just sat there. And I found it so difficult to write. But I felt it had to be in the book because this one really important thing happened on the train. And then finally, I realized that this one important thing can happen somewhere else, more interesting. Or I can just summarize the whole train journey in one sentence at the beginning of the next chapter. So yeah, that chapter got deleted, and I learned my lesson. Those are very difficult chapters to write, so avoid them if you can.
That's really interesting for anyone who wants to become an author to realize that, sometimes you just have to adapt and change things out that you realize it's not working.
Yeah.
That's really good to know. So my second question is, how did you come up with the names Cameron and Lewis? And then which personality would go with which twin?
Okay, so this is an embarrassing answer, because Cameron and Lewis, the names were a mistake. Yeah, don't tell anyone, just between us. So when I originally wrote the book, the first version of the book had the twins growing up in Scotland and running to Canada. But the publisher said, Canadian children would be much more interested in reading about Canadian children running to somewhere different. That would make the book a lot more interesting to them. So I rewrote the book that way around, which sounds like a lot of work, and it was, but it was fun because, of course, I had all the components of my book, of course. So it was easier to write the second time round. But I changed everything. I even changed the secondary characters. I changed the setting, of course. There was a lot I changed, but I forgot to change the names. Because the reason I called them Cameron and Lewis in the first version was because Cameron and Lewis were the most popular names for babies born in Scotland the year they would have been born. And of course, that's the names the parents would have given them, something really common names that would blend in. There'd be 4 Camerons in the class and 3 Lewises in the class, and no one would draw attention to them. Now, of course, when they grew up in Canada, what I should have done is change them to be called Liam and Ethan, which are the 2 names that were most common for baby boys born in Canada the year they were born. But I did not do that, and it was only after the book was published I went, "Oh, that was a mistake."
I have a son named Cameron, and I thought I was being very unique when I named him, and then he got to school and there were other Camerons. But anyway, so my next question is that, so you grew up in a Scottish seaside town.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that was the inspiration for the seaside town where the twins meet an important person, without giving any spoilers. And if you would also like to talk about any of the locations in the book.
Yes, well, the first draft of those scenes were of the town where I grew up. But the layout of the town wasn't quite right. I needed them going between landmarks, and there's certain landmarks in those chapters where they walked between, and it was going to be too far for them to walk. It was going to be a too boring walk. And even though I thought most people who read the book, of course, would never have visited the tiny little town I came from, some people might. And they would find it really annoying if I said, they got from this place to that place while they were chatting about this one really, really short thing. So instead, I set those chapters in the town just further north on the coast. It's about 15 minutes further north on the coast. And that did have the right layout. And also it had a really cooler name, had a much better name, more interesting name than my town. So I set it there. But it's a good question, because whenever you write, you can, of course, make up things. And it's really, really good to make up things. But sometimes when you're writing such a big, complicated book as this, it's nice to have some touch points where you say, okay, this is based on a real life place, and I know what it looks like, and I know what it feels like, and I know what it smells like, and I can just convert those images that I have in my head onto the paper. And then I can save all my imagination energy for dreaming up the plot and the characters and what's going to happen next. So yes, of course you can make up places, but it's nice to base them on places that you know well, because then you think of specific things that you might not think of when you're creating something from scratch, and it can make it feel more real. So yeah.
That's great. I agree. I think that there would be that one person or group of people that know that town and would call you out on it and say, like, that's not how it was, if you had, like you'd said, if you had used that town.
Yeah.
So another thing I really want to know is how you decide where in time to start the story. And so, say instead of starting it like way before the barbecue when the twins were younger, or later when they're on the plane and just having flashbacks, like how do you decide, okay, this is the starting point?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, because authors spend, and I would imagine filmmakers as well, spend a long time thinking about where's the best place to start the story. Often they start it right before everything changes, because then you get to see a little bit of the characters in their normal world and what they usually are like. And then the thing that changes everything, or the inciting incident, that happens, and then you're off to the races. Then the story really starts. If you start too early, so 4 chapters before anything changes, readers get bored. You know, instinctively, they're waiting for something to happen. They're waiting for something to change. They're waiting for the story to start. So if you wait too long, readers will go, well, nothing's happening in this story. It's just too boring. Or they'll be really confused, like, well, did something happen and I completely missed it? And of course, you don't want readers to be bored or confused. So that's often where you start, right before the inciting incident. And that is where the story started. For the longest time, chapter 1 was started at the barbecue about 10 minutes before the strangers arrived. And then that chapter was about the strangers arriving and what went down. And it was really, really fun chapter to write. There was scuffles, and there was hostage situations, and there was blood, and there was screaming, and there was, anyway, anyway, it was a very, very fun chapter to write. And as I said, it was there for the longest time. But the thing with the first chapter of a book, or first scene of a movie, it's a promise to the reader or the viewer of what the book's going to be like. So by having that as my chapter 1, every time I reread it, I was like, God, I'm really kind of promising to the reader that this is going to be a book with blood and gore and people getting killed and really kind of scary situations. And it's not that type of book at all. The type of book it is really about 2 brothers having to rely on each other in order to survive. So I thought, well, that's really where I need to start the story. Even though I was very, very sad to lose my very dramatic chapter 1, I thought that's where the story needs to start. It needs to start showing the 2 brothers having to rely on each other, being thrown into this awful situation, and just like siblings do, oh, I think we should do this. No, I think we should do this. No, I think we should do this. We should go there. No, we should go here. You're wrong. No, you're wrong. So really starting, promising the reader in chapter 1 what they were going to get. And then, of course, you have to show what happened, but then I chose to use flashbacks to show what happened.
I think you did the exact right thing, because it worked perfectly.
Good.
So obviously you made a great choice, but it's very interesting to hear about that idea of starting at the beginning of, before something's happening, just before.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I guess you've given a lot of great advice for anyone who wants to become an author, but if you have any other key points for any of the readers and viewers watching that would like to become an author, would be great to hear.
Yeah, three pieces of advice. The first piece of advice is don't narrow yourself down to becoming an author. I'd really think of yourself as a storyteller, and experiment with different ways of telling stories, just like I spoke about in the presentation. Yeah, just play with stories, enjoy stories, love stories for the sake of stories rather than pinning yourself down to one particular way of sharing a story. The second piece of advice I would give is to just consume as many stories as you can. Read lots of books or listen to books, watch movies. I mean, even movies with car chases and gunfire, and they all have a story. You'll be able to watch that movie and go, oh, well, at what point did everything change? And who are the main characters? And who are the secondary characters? And where is it set? And I wonder why they set it there. And when is it set? And I wonder why they set it there. So just look for stories everywhere. And even ask people, like old people especially, grandparents and great aunts and uncles and old neighbours. They're really, really fun to say, tell me a story, tell me one of your stories, and just listen to other people's stories. So that's the second piece of advice. Just open yourself up to stories because stories are everywhere. The third piece of advice, if you're going to be a storyteller of any kind, to be a storyteller, you're really understanding the world and being able to translate it into a way that people are going to find enjoyable. So you be aware of your surroundings, notice things. So if you're sat on a bus, if you're waiting somewhere for your parents to arrive, if you're in a doctor's office, if you're just hanging around the hallways at school, don't be on your phone. Put that phone away and just watch. What does a doctor's office smell like? What does a bus smell like? What do the school hallways smell like? Probably not good. What do they sound like? How do people interact with each other when they're in the classroom versus the hallways versus a bus? So really just, I suppose, be present. Just start to look at the world and see things and specific details and sights and smells, and just open yourself up to the world, and that's where you're going to find stories. Usually you're going to find stories in the real world and go, oh, what's that person doing? Oh, I wonder if they're doing this. Wouldn't it be cool if they were doing that, or if they were on their way here, or yeah, so open yourself up to the world.
So that's a fantastic piece of advice. I love that. So the last thing before my very last one, so second last question, what are you reading right now? And do you have any favorite Canadian authors or books that you would recommend?
Well, first of all, those amazing books on the Forest of Reading, I had a look at them the other day and they're fantastic. So I'm going to put all of those on hold at the library and I'm going to try and read some, if not all of them. But what I'm reading now is, and you'll love this if you'll probably know as a librarian, Elizabeth, but if you're a lover of fairy tales or fantasy books, an author called Diana Wynne Jones, and I just started reading her and she's so fantastic. And she's been writing for 30, 40 years. So she's got a lot of books, a lot of middle grade books, but a lot of books for young adults, some books for young adults as well. And the book I've just finished is Howl's Moving Castle, which is a really, really fun book. And no matter what age you are, I recommend you read that. It's really fun. And then the other book of hers I've got on hold at the library because Howl's Moving Castle was so good is Fire and Hemlock. And that's for young adult readers. So I'm excited to see how she writes fantasy and fairy type stories for older children.
Excellent. So our very last question is, how does it feel to be nominated for the Forest of Reading this year and to be part of a celebrated group of Canadian authors?
Really happy. I'm really, really pleased. Obviously very honoured, but also just to be able to do things like this, to share storytelling with other people, to maybe go into schools, to come to the festival in May and meet the readers and maybe do a workshop. And it's such a fantastic way to get people linked up with really good books, and for readers to meet readers, and authors to meet readers, and authors to meet authors, and authors to meet librarians who are fantastic people. So yeah, I think I'm really, really happy to be part of it and excited for the next few months.
I'm very excited about the festival, and I will be there to see you as well.
Great.
And it is an amazing experience, a feeling of it's like a rock concert for authors.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So in closing, I would like to thank you so much, Nicola Dahlin. I make sure I say your whole name. Everybody remember the book, even though it's on my screen. I realize I don't know if you can see it because of how my background thing goes. It kind of disappears on
me.
Yeah,
you can see it.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and stories and your creativity with us today. It was such an incredible opportunity for Forest of Reading participants across the country to connect with inspiring voices like yours. I want to say to viewers, don't forget to visit forestofreading.com to see the full lineup of upcoming author and illustrator sessions, book-related activities, and everything you'll need for this year's Forest Adventures. Keep reading, keep exploring new stories, and we can't wait to see you at the next session. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Nicola.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.